When you partner with Axon, you immediately gain access to a full range of products and solutions designed to meet the complex needs of today's grower. We carry all major brands and sizes of tires and wheels. We specialize in large diameter wheels for large equipment. We have one of the largest OEM replacement wheel inventories in North America. Known for extreme flotation setups, duals, and triples, we have wheels for all makes and models of tractors, sprayers, combines, and grain carts. If we don't have the wheel in stock, we'll custom build, sandblast, and paint in-house. There isn't a more vast inventory in North America dedicated to helping dealers move more iron. With facilities on the West Coast and in the heart of the Midwest, leverage our 230,000 square feet of indoor inventory to solve any problem a grower may have. Move more iron with Axon.
Moving iron.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast. This edition of Moving Iron Podcast is brought to you by Tractor Zoom, where data meets diesel, or where diesel meets data. I always forget. I always get mixed up.
Yeah, we're diesel meets data. I'm gonna have to go grab my hat, and I suppose it works both ways, though.
Yeah, either way, it's working. It's the same both ways, no doubt about it. Well, I got Andy Campbell on here from Tractor Zoom, and he is nice to come on and talk about what's happening in the marketplace. So, Andy, how you doing, man?
Hey, Casey, doing well, really well.
Right on. Well, a lot of interesting stuff happening right now. We're seeing some growth in the overall inventory out there for sale. A lot of that has to do with supply chains on the new side getting kind of picked back up, and we're seeing more things come into play. We're watching more and more of these used equipment come in that doesn't necessarily have a place to go right away, but there's still a lot of this stuff that is finally showing up that guys are buying. So, Andy, I guess as you're looking out there right now, what do you see happening and what's going on at Tractor Zoom right now?
Yeah, so, we're seeing the supply return in the market. We've been seeing some of that supply, especially in terms of smaller tractors and then in combines after that were happening this fall. And it's something we were monitoring for a while. Again, nothing really alarming because it's a bit more of a return to normalcy. But it also, along with the supply chain woes, was happening in waves, and it wasn't really a smooth transition. And so what that's really caused is maybe a bit of an oversupply, some in combines and your compact, subcompact tractors. And that's having a bit of a ripple effect, but it doesn't go across all categories. So we're also monitoring planters, sprayers, and row crop tractors. And those are being affected by a little bit of the supply returning, but maybe more in a positive way. And and so, we're seeing some supply return there to dealers' lots, and those inventory carrying amounts growing.
Sure. Yep. So obviously, I don't think this is any big shock to anybody out there that's paying attention to what's going on in the market. But there's the combine inventory is returned back to I would say pretty close to 2020 level. If you go out and take a look at the overall marketplace and how many machines are out there, it's pretty close to what we saw in 2020 pre-COVID. If you go back and take a look at that, the biggest difference with all that is the price of the machines that are out there now, what that average price has come down to. As I go back and look at it, I'm seeing in 2020 that there was about $175,000-ish average machine price across the entire spectrum, from the newest of the new to the oldest of the old. And then now we're seeing something in the neighborhood of about $225,000 to $230,000 on average, which also has a big retro effect. Let me turn around here. Has a big effect on what we see happen, strictly because of what was going on in the supply chain and in the price increases that we've seen due to COVID-based stuff. We saw, everything had a huge jump across that 2-year period. When you're looking at that, are you seeing something similar to that, Andy?
Oh yeah. The first graph that I think we pulled up, we're looking at holding costs. And so you've got not only supply in there, but you've got then the supply multiplied by the price that was alarming, especially when you're looking at class 8s, because there's a lot of the class 8s out there. they're priced significantly higher than the others. And so that was probably the most alarming graph that we've seen is the increase in the overall holding cost of those Class 8s. But you're right, though. It's largely due to when you're looking at maybe a 30 to a 40% price increase from what they were 2.5 years ago. That's going to make anything look alarming.
Sure.
But the supply is returning, but it's compounded by those price increases.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other side of that too is, so I've kind of, there's a couple things I look at when you start looking at like a declining markets and those kind of things, what you're starting to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to see if your data correlate, because I operate off bro science quite a bit here. So, take it for what it's worth. But, when you take a look at the overarching kind of how everything's are playing out, you have about 3 phases of a market when I look at it. So you have the hot market where the late model low hour stuff selling, you can't get enough of it. People bang, 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 bang. We saw that in, basically 2020 through 2022 and even into 23 a little bit here, but it's starting to cool off a little bit. But you're starting to kind of see the stuff transition over to more of what I would call the value side of the used equipment marketplace, where it's not necessarily what they want, but it's what they need type of scenario. Right. I need a new combine and I can afford this, with the way interest rates are or whatever the spectrum is, whatever the issue is. You start looking at that. And then you have the third phase of that where it's really kind of comes down to, I have this much capital and I have this much equity, and this is what I can afford to do after I make my trade-ins and this is my down payments come together. This is what I can do. And a lot of that is kind of circumventing what banks will allow them to do based around, I've got 50 grand worth of cash and I got $50,000 worth of equity in the machine. I've got $100,000 to put down on a new machine. That's the kind of thing that we're not there yet. I would say that's like an 1819 style kind of approach to what the business will happening there. Where I think now we're in the middle, where the guys are looking at a value of, I want the 1 or 2 year old machine, but I need to upgrade my 6 or 7 or 8 year old machine to a 3 to 4 to 5 year old machine. I think that's what we're seeing, Andy. Are you seeing something similar to that in your data?
Yeah, we're seeing it in our data, and I can kind of show you where we think that's happening and the shift in our market trends. And then also, we work with a lot of ag banks, ag lenders, and farm credits. And I was talking to one up in northern Iowa not too long ago, and they said that they were seeing that shift, and that conversation was starting to happen a lot more often with their farmers, where it wasn't time to ring any alarm bells, but the conversation certainly shifted to, okay, if you're going to see a reduced profitability this year, and then the year after that is largely uncertain, because there's a ton of uncertainties right now out there in the farm economy, that they said, okay, what's the prudent choice now, so you can control your payments this year, but also thinking that next year and the year beyond. Whereas the conversation from the 2 prior years was, how big can I upgrade and how can I reduce my tax, my tax burden? And so they said, and it, conversation probably should have happened for a lot of the farmers last year, but it's good that it's happening now when it's likely still going to be a profitable year for them, just not nearly as profitable.
Not like it's been. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I think you're starting to see that, like you talked about, that conversation creep in there more. And I think you're seeing it largely on combines. Because if you take a look at in your auction data, I'll probably back this up a little bit, but kind of what I've noticed is that there are not as many bites on that 1 year old, 2 year old stuff that we saw. When you look at the number of bids during those auction prices, where you saw a lot of bids on those stuff that when it would come up for auction, because in a lot of cases that was the one that was available, right? That one was there the last couple of years. Now you start looking at those machines and there's not as many. They're still selling for a good price. There's not as many bids as you saw previously. But if you go down, kind of further on down the trough a little bit, you start hitting some of those 5 year old machines. You start seeing more bids kind of popping up on those machines than you saw previously. What's your data showing on that?
Yeah, we can dive into that right now and do a kind of a live share here. So just pulling up, got a few different screens, but taking a look here just within the market trends. So this is live, so anything can happen. But let's take a look at combines overall and different filters here. Yeah. with overall combines, and one of the things that we should, give a quick overview on, that we can look at any class here. And so if we're looking at overall popular models, the S780s, 680s are sitting out there, but it gets back to the point that we're talking about, that there's a lot of those class 8s, especially those 780s sitting around that are making those holding costs a little bit higher. But let's take a look down just at some of these class 8s. Yeah, and I'm gonna give myself a little bit more of a year-over-year view. And year-over-year, we've added about 75% more dealers. So a little bit of this growth here, and I can kind of equate that is due to just so many more dealers hopping onto our tractors and listing our equipment. But yeah, so with combines, we've seen the supply rise about 40% year over year. But the conversation, Casey, you and I were having this before we hopped on, there just wasn't a lot of supply last year. Right. And so, that's not as alarming. But the sales are, for that increase in supply, the sales aren't necessarily keeping up, especially on these class 8s. And so I'd say of any of these categories, it's this one that's maybe the most alarming. We look back at May, and this is a dealer sold 156 of these sold to this May, 190, but we're adding on 75% more. So you're actually seeing your sales year over year drop. But one of the things you can also go down here and do, and let's take a look. These are the numbers in proportion listed by hour range. Last year, let's just clean this up a little. So this is how we're sitting now. Now this is what's currently on the market on dealer lots. And so you've got, I don't know if these hour categories are exactly how you would define the washout curve, but
that's pretty close enough,
yeah, 0 to 500. These are machine hours. But that's how you're sitting now. This is what we were looking at last year, and just kind of a jagged and not a smooth type of process. It's really kind of all over the place.
It's interesting what you have there, because if you see where your growth in machines are, so the light blue is that current, right?
That's current. Yep.
Okay. All right. So the light blue, if you look where you're at, the growth in those machines now, a couple things come into play there. One, just like you talked about, there's more machines on the market now than there were this time last year. That's no doubt about it. Irregardless of manufacturer, the first quarter of 22 deliveries were abysmal. I mean, there just were not stuff getting out there. Most stuff showed up late summer, early fall, and got pushed through there through the end of the year. And I think that's where you see that at. And a lot of that too is some of that stuff, where we're sitting at right now. But if you look at where you're at year over year in that that 1,500 to 2,000 hour machine, and how much that's dropped off comparatively to what it was the year before, that's kind of my point I was making earlier about where we're at in that middle. That's the value machine. That's not the, hey, I've got two nickels to rub together, I'm going to go out and get a machine. That's what they're looking at right there. So some of these guys had 3,000 hour machines, 2,500 hour machines, and they're looking at that 1,000, 1,500 hour, maybe 2,000 hour machine to come in and kind of jump back in there, because it's just the dollars that are associated with that now that's what they can afford. And I think that's the kind of some of the jagged little pill to swallow there. I think on some of this stuff is that just because of where the price of these machines are at now, what used to cost X at 1,500 hours is not what it costs today. And that's a big jump in what that value of that machine looks like. Right.
You're right. The last couple of years, those 1,000 hour machines, the cost of those is now really what they're having to pay for that 1,500 to 2,000 hour. Yeah. And so, I anticipate this for the next year at least. We'll see what happens beyond that for these categories in terms of supply of 1,500 to 2,000 to be a hotter commodity for people looking for those, as long as they fit in their operation. You get much above 2,500, and that's a different type of farmer that wants those. They can make that work for their operation. But yeah, I really see this category being the hot one. And then this, really the less than 500 step hours, 500 machine hours. Those are probably going to be harder to move off the dealer lots, don't you think?
I think so. Just because, I mean, you start looking at pricing, you start looking at where those things are playing in at, and then you start looking at the interest associated with those. It's going to be harder to move those machines. And there are, and your graph shows that just the sheer number of those machines out there, that starts, typical supply and demand, as your supply goes up and your demand comes down, economics 101, you're going to start running into more competition with those machines. And I got to buy it today because that's the only one that's there. This whole scarcity premium thing I've been talking about, that's starting to fade, and we're starting to see that slowly. But the nice thing about this is that it's a slow, gradual reset, and not you went to bed one day thinking there might be a problem, and you woke up the next morning and the problem's at your doorstep. This is more of a gradual flow into that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good summary for the entire market, because of all the categories and all the classes and subclasses we're looking at, Class 8 combines probably the most troublesome, and just due to allocations and supply chain issues, so maybe dumb luck, it wasn't overproduced for the last few years, and so that's going to help things a little bit. And getting back to your comment on the Econ 101, when you've got an oversupply like that, this graph down here just shows the year-over-year average price in those hour categories. And again, light blue is current, so you can see how we've dropped year-over-year for those lower hour categories. And
you're starting to see some of that come into play too, like you talked about before we got on here, is the price adjustments that we're starting to see on machines that have been on the market for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it's not once you get into data in this current age and the tools that people have, it's good because you don't have to make a broad brush decision saying, hey, all combines are in trouble, and so you're not cutting the cost of all combines. And then even within Class 8s, you can identify, and we can see it right here, that those S780s are a challenge. 680s not far behind it, and you can kind of see over the past year the price changes and the drastic decrease the dealers have made on those price changes. But it's a year-over-year change. Yeah, that's year-over-year change.
Okay.
And so again,
that's significant. That's a significant change
on those two. Yeah. And granted, the year and the 2 years before, they saw massive price increases. Yeah. But you're not necessarily seeing that price decrease as much on the rest of these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's especially on the Class 7 combine, just because of the number of stuff that's there, but the market's given back that price increase that we saw, that propped up the used equipment marketplace so long. That this is a good example of that quote unquote scarcity premium being eroded away. I mean, you start seeing some of these things as for what they are, and again, economics 101. Supply increases. You have more competition out there now, and you're going to have to start really paying attention to your pricing structure.
Mm-hmm. You're right, and especially on these, these carry the largest holding cost, and so there's a pretty good incentive to get them off the lots, and there's the incentive right there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I should say that we won't go into depth on all the other ones, but your Class 6s, not a lot of them are being produced anymore, but you can just see them right here. Year over year, slow and steady on those price increases. See if we can quickly change over to Class 7.
That's just kind of as a point to put out there. Mm-hmm. Those Class 6s, when you had the S, what was it? You had the
660s.
Yeah, at the top three. You had 75 listings changed. Where on the 780s you had 1355 or whatever it was.
Right.
You had a fair amount of change there in how big that pool is that's making that difference. So yeah,
absolutely.
That shows you that on the Class 8 side of it, that it's a wholesale change across the board. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not just a few pieces here and there that are making difference up. Here on your 660 side of it, it's 75 changes, then it changed 1.26%. I mean, that's hard. That's nothing. When you start looking at 26% across 1,300 machines, that means there's a wholesale change coming down the pipe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's all related. I was talking to a deer dealer out east, and he was just saying, their market is certainly different, especially in the Class 8s and larger that he buys. He's got particular farmers that are doing well; they'll pay for what they need. But then he said they do get a little bit of a spillover effect, especially for what happens in Indiana and Ohio. It starts to affect the local market. But he was saying that they're somewhat isolated.
Yeah, it's funny how that's. I mean, everybody's a little bit different, but everybody's the same. And in the it's the what 85 or 90% of the time everyone's doing about the same thing. It's just that 10 or 15% that makes a dramatic change or dramatic difference in your area, and that's a big misconception, I think, in some marketplaces.
Right. And again, we're talking combines here, and again, they're in a challenging spot right now. But like we mentioned earlier, it's no sign that this is happening across all the equipment categories. There's a higher supply in the combines. There's certainly a higher supply in the compacts and subcompacts, especially if you've got more of an acreage type of dealership. But that doesn't translate into necessarily the row crop tractors. We're seeing a return of supply, but not the sky's not falling.
Right. Yep. All right. So let's jump over there and talk a little bit about what we see happen on the tractor side of the business. So again, supply. Again, my bro science is kicking in here, but I mean, supply seems to me like you're seeing more machines sitting on lots on the front row, ready for sale, that you're not seeing, that you've seen anywhere else, right? So I guess, Andy, taking a look at the tractor marketplace, what are you seeing there, and are you seeing a pattern of growth there as well?
Right. Yeah. So if we're taking a look at the tractor market, and let's just make one broad swipe above with all tractors right now. Smaller tractors were easier to produce in the last couple of years, so way more supply in those compacts and subcompacts. Once we start to move up into the row crop side, then obviously that production was a little bit harder to ramp up. We're still seeing more, especially on the smaller row crop tractor. I'm going to make sure here I get some drive type there. That we're seeing supply return to these fairly significantly in the smaller row crops. So 175 to 300 horsepower. That's up about 30 to 40% if we're looking just year over year. And again, this is taken into consideration. We've added about 75% more dealerships that are listed with us. But even with that increase in supply, that some of the sales were met right away, and you can really see this, that you start to get into your sales season. Sales picked up all the way through December, and they were strong in this spring, but they have started to tail off a little bit. And when you look last May to this May, taking those 75% more dealers in there, you're pretty much flat, maybe down even a little bit year over year with small row crop tractor sales, less than 300 horse. So, I think part of that story right now is due to that the market's a little slower, but I think part of it too is maybe a shift in farmer preference. And I don't know if this goes everywhere, but I know here in the Midwest that if you've got less than a 300 horsepower tractor, it's going to be challenging to pull everything that you need to pull with it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think you're seeing, again, I think there's always seems to be things that are going good. Tractors are updated pretty early when you look at that. And I think the turn on used tractors it's still high, but it's not like it was. But I also think some of the things that we're seeing on the tractor marketplace as far as sales being driven has a lot to do with there's just finally what they've been waiting for is finally here. And I think some of that is what we're seeing in the tractor marketplace. And as this backlog of tractors kind of makes its way through, which I think we're about through that, the second half of 23 will be interesting to see what that, especially when you start looking at 300 plus horsepower tractors, at 300 to 400 hour or 300 to 400 horsepower row crop tractor. What's that look like the second half of the year? Are we going to see some buildup of inventory going through the end of the year? And especially that late model stuff would be interesting to watch, see if that happens. Because I think, again, tractors, we're starting to see that that middle segment kind of start to pop in there, where this is what I need, not what I want. And you're starting to see some of that again, like you go back to 1819, where that 1,500 hour tractor, that 3,000 hour tractor was a really hot machine. You're starting to see that again, and starting to creep back into. We have more people asking for stuff like that. From the guys I've been talking with, they have people that have been asking for not the five. I mean, they still got eyes asking for the 500 hour tractor, but they're still looking at, hey, what do you got that's 1,000 hours? What do you got that's 1,500 hours? What do you got that's 2,000 hours? That kind of stuff. You're starting to have more of those conversations pop into a lot of people I've been talking to anyway, into that conversation.
Right. And us and our farm, we're the exact same way. We're looking to upgrade tractors. We're particular and we don't need to necessarily do it now and looking for that exact type, but it is in the back of our mind, okay, what's a manageable payment that we can make on that, knowing that profitability is a question in the next couple of years.
Sure.
So yeah, it's exactly what we're going through. And, speaking of those higher horsepower, so we're looking here and, your annual price increases are modest at best. Probably the biggest note there is, we're not talking double-digit price increases year over year. So we're back to maybe a time of normalcy. But looking at those larger row crop tractors here, and now all of a sudden we're starting to see a lot more of that supply, just a steady increase in that supply returned a lot. So this is really what you're seeing out there, where you start to see more and more tractors parked up on those lots. Looking at this overall, number of them sold, 150 to 206. Math is, that's about 30% increase, 40% increase.
Yeah, pretty close.
Yeah, and let's take a look. Sometimes this is a little telling. If we're looking now, and this is different than what we've seen in the combine, where we're seeing kind of price decreases and drawing back into those prices a little bit. Light blue is current. We're still seeing an annual year-over-year price increase for those less than 500 hours on these larger row crop tractors. And we didn't see this on combines, didn't see this on smaller row crop tractors. Now, once you get a bit bigger, though, those prices are coming back into reality. Or sorry, this isn't price, this is the quantity. Sorry about that. But yeah, seeing the quantity increase on those. And there's the price. So yeah, this really goes to support what you were just saying, that might have a bit more of a buildup in those 500 hour and less, those late model tractors.
Yeah, for sure. Yep, and that's the other thing too. Just kind of looking at that average price down there that you've got, and you start looking at the 2,000 to 3,000 hour machine, where they were priced at currently compared to where they were in 24. It's amazing how much that has jumped up, or 22. Sorry, 23 to 24. I mean, what that looks like. So it's pretty how the price has gone up on the used, even though we're starting to see it's been a steady increase every year. That is.
Yeah. And when I look at this graph, I haven't done it for this particular view, so we'll see how this shakes out. But, if we're looking at this for an annual standpoint, and then this is just the last 6 months, which really looks fairly similar down here to the annual and the price decrease. But I think this low hour type stuff, that price decrease happened about 6 months ago, and it's been steady since. Moving to the last 3 months. So parity, right? So if you're trying to figure out kind of when that price decrease happened, it really looks like it was happening, anywhere between 6 and 3 months ago. So roughly the first quarter of this year, they made some adjustments, and then from then, it's been relatively steady. And so getting back into realizing that the market's different, but now being rational and kind of holding some prices, I think is what we're probably seeing on the dealer market.
Yep. Okay. Well, one more thing, Andy, and we'll kind of let us go. So I have this, again, I function off of bro science a lot, so take it with a grain of salt. But I have this theory that every 3 to 5 years, you see a big shift between four-wheel drive tractors and sprayers. Right? Mm-hmm. So you see the sprayer market will be good for a long time, and then it'll fall off, and then the four-wheel drive marketplace will pick back up, and then when it falls off, the sprayer market picks back up. My theory is it has a lot to do with no-till farming practices and those kind of things, where the weeds have kind of gotten out of control, and we need to go back in and till and kind of work the ground up a little bit more, and then go back to our no-till situation that we're doing. What are you seeing right now? I mean, because you look at the sprayer market, there's hardly any sprayers out there, figuratively speaking. I mean, it's a very slim marketplace. As you look at the four-wheel drive marketplace and at the sprayer marketplace, what are you seeing out there right now as far as volume goes?
Okay. Yeah. So let's take a look at the sprayer market first. And while I pull up the sprayers, I do have to ask you, because I just saw this come across some social feed the other day, that the John Deere is now offering kits, upgrade kits to See and Spray. So is that a new thing? And how do you think that might affect the sprayer market? Yeah,
so I've seen it. I think every manufacturer is going to start going down that path where there's only so many, $500,000 machines that they can sell to people. And you start looking at how that incorporates and functions into, that's going to be a big part of machinery moving forward. Is the value of the machine is going to be based around what it's upgradable to, and not necessarily what the hours are, right? I mean, that's going to play a factor into it, but it's, if there's going to be some hard stop somewhere on a piece of equipment where you can autonomously take a tractor back to 2018 or whatever and put this kit on there from brand new to 2018. Well, what's that do to 2017 year model, right? I mean, there's going to be some hard stop in there somewhere where you can't upgrade it past a certain point, and that's going to have a pretty dramatic effect, in my opinion, on what the used value looks like. And right. I think that's going to change the way. Plus, all these upgrade kits too are going to change the way people look at their equipment, right? Mm-hmm. I don't have to now to upgrade. I don't have to lock, stock, and barrel trade everything in. I just have to sell off this wet system and put on this wet system, and I'm good to go, right?
Right.
And I think that's going to change the way people view and look at how they functionally look at used equipment, right? I mean, mm-hmm. This chassis is upgradable to X, and this spray system is upgradable to Y. A guy in Texas buys the chassis, and a guy in Minnesota buys the wet kit, and you kind of piecemeal things together the best way you can. So to answer your question, I think what ultimately happens here at the end of the day is that how you on your farm look at your equipment now isn't going to be so much based around how many hours are on it, those kind of things, but what can I do with the machine that I have? And is it worth buying this newer system, because now I have a 10-year life cycle of upgradability on this machine that I don't have on this machine? I think that starts playing effect into that.
Yeah, it starts to mirror a little bit more of technology than it.
Yeah, it's a computer, right? You start looking at your computer. How do I spend the $5,000 today to get the best, latest and greatest? That way I can use it for 5 years, or do I just buy the bare bones and every 2 years I get a new computer? Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of what you're looking at there.
Yeah. Well, getting to your question on the sprayers versus the four-wheel drives, one of the things. Because I've looked into sprayers a lot. There's a lot of nuances within the self-propelled sprayer market. And year over year, we've seen some pretty good increase on supply. But then I was questioning, because I don't see a lot out on the used lots when I'm driving around, at least in the Midwest. But that's also because, June, we've got that down here because we're just a partial month right now. We've also seen sales pick up a lot of that new supply that's coming into the market. Pent up demand and ability to buy. And so when we, account for the growth in dealership, we've got probably about an 80% increase in supply that we've seen on the lots, but we've also had sales that have increased about 50%. And so they haven't soaked up everything that's returned to the market. But, when I look at all my categories, sprayers have probably soaked up the most of this return of supply. And so, maybe a 20% increase on months of supply that's sitting and fluctuating on dealers' lots when it's all said and done. But in terms of, price consistency, just general seasonal price decreases, and it looks good. So if you want to compare that, though, let's go back to tractors and let's look at some large, just four-wheel drive tractors. So, if I'm summarizing sprayers, I'm saying that they look consistent and maybe one of the stronger categories out there, with larger row crop tractors. I'd say those two, looking pretty good. And, we just started to split out our categories here. So we're looking at, not just 300 plus now, but 425 plus, and the ability here to dice into 4-wheel drive. So looking, just at these, the supply, and I'm gonna tweak my months here just a little bit so I can get a full month of last year, May, in there. That's, if we're looking 355 last year to just shy of 600 this year, if I take that 75% dealer growth into consideration, and I can't do that math in my head, but I did it beforehand, you're actually dropping supply about 4%. So pretty much supply on these things is flat. Right. Sales, though, when you do the same rough math, last year, 78, we have sold 78 this year. And that's with the growth in dealerships. So that's a 75% drop in sales in these things. And that's, I haven't looked through every single subcategory in the way you can dice this up, but of all the ones that I've looked at, that's probably one of the bigger sales decreases I've seen year over year out of any category we're looking at. And so that holds some weight and kind of reinforces what you're saying is, if you've got sprayers and these large 4-wheel drives on a teeter-totter, sprayers are up and 4-wheel drives looking down.
Yeah. It's always been something I've paid attention to, because that correlation seems to be there. And I'm by no means do I have any data to back that up. It just feels like every 3 to 5 years you see this big influx and the shift in sales of 4-wheel drives to sprayers and those kind of things. And you see the same thing with tillage as well. I mean, you'll see these spurts in tillage growth where you see, and typically that's because every 5 years it feels like there's some new tillage technology that comes out and it's better than what was before. It's all these different things that come into play. So that might have something to do with it too. But it seems like 4-wheel drives, when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, it's just I see a correlation between 4-wheel drives and sprayers.
Right. Yeah. And in 4-wheel drives in particular, I'd be interested in following this one. We're talking maybe a few years into the future beyond that too, that I've seen other equipment categories tend towards smaller now, especially once people talk about real futuristic and get into the automation piece. And so over the past year and a half, different presentation, I did an analysis on row crops compared to 4-wheel drives. And about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, you start to see a separation in when you're looking at equal horsepower on row crop tractors versus like articulating 4-wheel drives. And the row crop tractors continue to grow in price and value. The 4-wheel drives don't keep up in terms of their price per horsepower hour.
Right.
And so I don't know if that'll continue to go, but if you can handle, if you can pull an equipment with a strong row crop tractor, how many people are going to then also want to buy, an articulating one that can't necessarily run down the rows?
Right. I think that's a good point you bring up there, and you start looking at those things. The higher horsepower 4-wheel drive, I'm talking like the 500-600 hour machines. If you start looking at where the quad track, the RX, the what's Versatile is called? I always forget what it's called. Versatrack or whatever it's called. I mean, I think that's what it's called. Anyway, doesn't matter. You start looking at those higher horsepower machines, and you're starting to see more track machines creep into that. And I think 2 reasons for that. One is you put a set of 800s all the way around a 4-wheel drive, and you go down a highway with those things. It's almost 15 yards wide. I mean, it's crazy how wide that thing is. As you're going down the road, 15 yards might be a little bit of an exaggeration there, but it's it just takes up so much space, and you're half in the ditch, and you're still taking up a whole lane of the highway. You know what I mean? So going down the road, so that's starting to play a factor in that. The track systems are, they're all within the width of the machine, and you go down there. The issue that you run into some of that stuff is that going down the road. So you're starting to see more of these machines, those RX style machines, those quad track style machines, where you're starting to see more of those being introduced into a true planting scenario where going down the road initially doesn't matter. It's the crop care work that you do after the fact. You start looking at down the road scenarios, and you're starting to see more of that kind of creep into the situation. Now, as it says today, kind of back to your point, I think have a little bit to do with that, is that you can still do a lot of stuff with a 350 to 400 horsepower row crop tractor and still pull a 24 row planter at speed and do everything that you need to do there. 16 to 24 row planters are the most dominant size planters out in the marketplace right now. And you can still functionally do that with a 350 to 400 horsepower machine. Right. And I think you're seeing that growth. So I'd love to get your opinion on this. And I know it's kind of putting you on the spot here, but when Aaron Fennell and I have had this discussion a lot, where does the 400 horsepower row crop tractor fit into the 400 horsepower articulated four-wheel drive and that 425 horsepower tractor? So you start looking at, parasitic loss and all those things that come into play on a four-wheel drive, going through two different differentials and those kind of things that you're looking at. If you have a 425 horsepower tractor and you have a 400 horsepower, a 410 horsepower or 415 horsepower row crop tractor, the really only advantage on the four-wheel drive side of it is the sheer weight of the machine and how much weight you can put on there and what you can pull with it, right? Based around that thing. You have your limitations on the row crop side of it, right? You can weight it down pretty good, but you can't weight it down like you do a four-wheel drive, right? Right. So where's that conversation take place? And then where does that creeping in to, are you losing some very low end, high horsepower four-wheel drive? That low end four-wheel drive marketplace to these higher horsepower row crops. And then that's where you're seeing the explosion of the 500 plus horsepower four-wheel drives. Cause that's where you're starting to see that growth at is on that high even 550 plus probably is a better place to have that delineation line at. But, looking at that, what's your data saying about that? Are you seeing a big growth in that 350 to 425 horsepower row crop tractor comparatively to the four-wheel drive side of it?
Yeah, so good question. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to split this up too, just because we had so many dealers talking to us about that delineation of, okay, this is really starting to be two different categories, two different types of a market here. And getting back to kind of the earlier point on, how do the two stack up if you're talking similar horsepower on, call it near a 400 horsepower articulating versus a row crop. I don't see the articulating, being able to hold a candle too much longer to those row crop tractors. It's just, I don't see planter sizes getting much larger, and I actually see them in our data tending towards a little bit more manageable and smaller. Still 24, but if you can pull it with this, you're not going to need a large one. And then getting back to the tillage question we talked about earlier, that if we are now, at least currently lending towards more spray, less till, then you're also not going to need to pull something larger there with it either. So from a data standpoint on our 300 horse here, let me sure I can let's take a look at row crop. So strong supply increasing. And one of the, the first telltale signs is what's actually happening out in the market. And we're looking at a little over a year here, but pretty much flat on those price increases, showing that the demand is just as strong. That compare this with what we just saw when we were looking at those four-wheel drives, a 150 to a little over 200 in terms of them sold. And so that's keeping up with our dealer growth. So we're not seeing that decrease in sales like we were on the four-wheel drive. And here, let's just look at the past 6 months. Maybe some of that decrease or the sales is happening a little bit in those higher hours, 1500 and larger, as we see those. So, supply in those categories drop a little bit, and a little bit more in that supply in that low hour, probably getting to the farm profitability issue that we talked about, and farmers making a more judicious choice with their money here. And then and the list price, it is coming down year over year, but let's, if that's year over year, let's look at what's just happened in the past 6 months. So really since January, with these larger row crop tractors, seeing them hold their value for the most part. If there's any kind of price decrease, came a little bit late in 22. At least that's what we're seeing with our data.
Yep. Yeah. No, I mean, I would agree. That's obviously data doesn't lie, but I mean, that's where that fluctuation that I was talking about coming into play right here is just that change in that lower side of that spectrum comparatively to what you see on the higher side of it, where it's a more sought after machine because you can do a lot of stuff with them. So yeah, it's crazy times we're living in, man. I'll tell you what, it's a shift in the way people are looking at equipment. I think that's going to be more and more evident as we continue down this path.
Right. Yeah. It's a study in buyer behavior for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Wayne, that's probably a good place to stop. If folks want to reach out to you over at Tractor Zoom, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so they can go, if they're looking to increase their market reach, go into tractorzoom.com, and then they can sign up for free dealer listings. Like I said, we've had about 75% growth just this past year of dealers listing their equipment for free to our audience. And right now we're about at 400,000 monthly active users that are hopping on our site every month looking for that equipment. But then a lot of other dealers, we're partnering with them to do valuations, but also help manage inventory and really leveraging our data and then our data science to help dealers be proactive on, controlling those inventory levels, carrying costs, and trying to predict when things will sell. So we're working with our data and dealers in a lot of different ways. And then go to ironcomps.com for that one and check out a demo, but there's also a contact us button. But they can just email me at acampbell@tractorzoom.com, whether it's just to talk shop or answer any questions. Happy to talk with them.
Right on. Well, Andy, I appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast, man.
Yeah, Casey, thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I really love you guys on here. So I'm Casey Seymour with Moving Iron Podcast. Check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC. Go to LinkedIn at Moving Iron Podcast and check out the video version of this over on the YouTube channel, which is the Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel. I mean, I really thought about that title for a long time when I came up with it. So, that's my cleverness coming out of me right there. So check that out. Go to Moving Iron LLC for everything Moving Iron related, and get all the information with the Moving Iron Summit coming up here in Nashville, Tennessee, September 11th through the 13th. Andy and his gang will be down there at the Moving Iron Summit, and they will have all the great information in there, and you can stop by the booth and check out what they got going on. So with that, I'm Casey Seymour with Andy Campbell. It's going to be smart, folks. Out.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hard work.